Well, thank you everybody this afternoon for joining us and thanks for Interrel for hosting this conference on behalf of Hyperion Solutions. It's a great name. We all worked there at some point in our past lives, usually. My name is Joe Malawicki, and I'm actually co-presenting EPM Cloud Wars, Azure versus OCI, with one of our practice leads, Jeff Henkel, and we'll jump right in. Before we get started, here's a quick little blurb. We have a webinar giveaway today. So anybody who's in attendance, if you go to our website, and we'll show the slide again at the end of the presentation, just scroll to the bottom of the page and subscribe now to our email list. Put a valid work email address in there, and we're going to have a drawing, which we're going to give away a $100 either Apple gift card or Amazon gift card, the winner's choice. All right, Jeff, you want to take it from here? Oh, you're on mute, Jeff.
Thank you. Real quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a brief introduction. We're going to talk a little bit at a high level what cloud services are, so we're all on the same playing field. We'll discuss some terminology differences between Azure and OCI. We're going to talk about some installation observations in those environments, some cloud infrastructure design considerations. We'll go over some real world results comparing the two, give you a feel for what the cost is depending on which vendor you would go with. And then last but not least, we hope to have some time for some Q&A.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, a little bit of quick background about myself. I am the Managed Services Practice Lead at IaaS Solutions. I've been in this EPM world for over 20 years, starting back in Hyperion and through Oracle and then on to various partners. I'm an Azure certified and actually also an Oracle certified architect. I've been a speaker at both Kscope and Collaborate. I've also led the Kscope infrastructure track for selecting the presentations they put on. And I've done dozens of migrations, both from on-prem to cloud and also from the various versions of EPM over the years.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. My name is Joe Malawicki, fast answer for myself. I'm the founder and principal architect at Oracle Solutions. I've been actually working with the EPM, BI, and InfraSpace for over 23 years now. It's kind of scary saying that out loud, but one more year tax every time we change the calendar. So very similar to Jeff, I'm actually also a professional certified cloud architect, a lot of certifications, done hundreds and hundreds of implementations, and as well as a top speaker award. My full bio is on LinkedIn. If you're really bored sometime, go check me out. And we'll kind of jump right into the good stuff here. Really fast about our company, and then we'll get into the content. Oracle Solutions, we are 100% onshore staffed services firm. We're a full services firm. We do advisory services, cloud solution, architect migration, infrastructure, data governance, EPM, BI, education, and of course, management and support services. We have offices in multiple states in the US, and we serve customers pretty much globally, but most primarily in the US, Canada, and EMEA. All right, so we're going to jump right in first to our first poll question. We have 2 or 3 questions for you folks today. Oh, and by the way, you're more than welcome to, throughout the conference, put your questions in the Q&A box for us. We'll be happy to answer those as we're talking or at the end of the session, okay? So the first poll question, let me just pop this open here. And we'll take about 30 seconds to have you folks answer these questions. The first question is, what brings you to the OCI versus Azure webinar today? We'll give them another 5-6 seconds here. Delete most of the votes in. All right, so we're going to end this first poll here. And let's share the results. So you get kind of consensus here today. It's pretty interesting. We have a lot of folks who are actually interested in hosting on one of the 2 platforms, which is to be expected. Or folks already have Azure OCI and they want to learn more about, how this impacts EPM. And yes, I appreciate that one person who answered honestly, where they're truly out of shows to stream right now, which I think we all are at this point. So. Okay, so moving right along, let's just take a quick minute to kind of recap for the folks on the phone. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. Basically to discuss what are cloud services and how this fits into the context of our presentation today. So cloud services or cloud infrastructure services comprise of multiple different tiers. And there's 3 main categories. In the category we're going to focus mostly on today, it's the bottom right corner of the slide. It's called infrastructure as a service or IaaS. This comprises of Think of this as somebody else's data center, somebody else's computing, network, and storage hookup. You're not physically hosting this on-premise, although in this day and age, you can't even do that if you want at a cloud level. But primarily, it's things like your data center, physical buildings, networks, security firewall, servers, and storage. That's sort of the base of any cloud services. And from there, you tack on a few more pieces, things like operating systems and possibly some development tools and databases. That would be called platform as a service, or PaaS. Okay. And the last piece of the umbrella for cloud services, generally speaking, it's something called software as a service. Okay. This is for folks of you who may be Hyperion-ish or Oracle EPM-ish. This would be things like EPM Cloud. Okay, as an example. So level setting today, our conversation, we're focusing on the infrastructure as a service and context and how that sort of ties into hosting or comparing EPM on-premise software on either Azure or OCI. And Jeff, you want to take it from here for technology differences?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever you look at the various cloud providers, and it really doesn't matter if you were to expand this list out to include Google or to include Amazon, you're going to find that the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Everybody has their own verbiage of how they think about the various layers within the offering. So for example, in OCI, we have availability domains, and Azure, they're called zones. Where networking is concerned, right, we have VCNs versus virtual networks. We have load balancing versus load balancers, and fast connect versus application gateways. I'm not going to read the whole list, to you, but if you align to these ideas, right, the concept that, maybe I'm in OCI and I'm looking at Azure or vice versa, or maybe I have components in both, it's important to remember that there's pretty much a corollary product release across all the major platforms that does the thing that you're used to the name of. So just kind of bear that in mind. And if we look at the next slide, we will actually find that if you go out to this URL here, that Oracle has provided a nice handy little map that just goes straight across all the various offerings so that you understand if there is a corollary from the vendor you're interested in using, or if maybe it's unique to one particular vendor. And this is updated pretty regularly, so it is pretty handy.
Yeah, and actually, as Jeff mentioned to the point too, is and that's the key thing. It's always a matter of finding it. The service, the solution offering is typically there. It's just a matter of what's it called in different providers' name.
All right, let's talk a little bit about compute shape. So when you start building out the various providers, they all have different ways of offering up what a broad category is called compute, what I think of as my server. There are 12 distinct series of compute shapes, and when I say series, that can involve multiple shapes that Azure offers. Each series has its own kind of focus, right? There's general compute that kind of is a middle ground for everything. There are memory focused options, storage focused options. There's low price options, even free sometimes. And you get a lot of flexibility at Azure into what you want to build and how you want to build it. The important thing to keep in mind as you're doing that is, there's usually a nice little cost estimate right there. So if you decide to go, a compute optimized, 32 CPU box with 256 gigs of RAM, understand that there's going to be a reckoning for that, and there's going to be a price behind it. For this, we're generally looking at the D series is what we focused on. Those are general purpose compute boxes that are most similar to the shapes we're able to build in OCI. And these are all vCPU based for core counts. So we're really talking about virtual computing here. So it's a little bit different if you're familiar with talking about CPUs than what you might see in the physical world.
Thanks, Jeff. So now let's kind of teeter over for a couple seconds here to OCI. And by the way, if you haven't kind of caught the gist of the conversation, Jeff's going to answer more of the Azure backend information. I'll be handling more of the OCI-based information, okay? So talking about OCI compute shapes. So very, very similar, again, to Azure, as you'll find most of these providers. We have a series of different types of shapes, as we call them. We typically have in the OCI world, there's actually 5 different categories, if you will. I'm sorry, 6 different categories, if you will, categories of compute shapes or options for OCI. You have your standard virtual machine shapes, again, general purpose shapes. Unlike Azure or even some other providers out there, Oracle doesn't kind of categorically put these into the compute driven, memory driven, storage driven. They're more general purpose shapes, and then you kind of customize from there what you're looking for. So you have your standard virtual machine shapes. You have what are called dense virtual machine shapes. This is the one exception. These are actually not going to use a series of storage. They're actually, I'm sorry, a series of dedicated storage. They're going to use dedicated storage versus shared storage for dense VMIOs. That's the one exception. I'm sorry. Bare metal compute shapes, which a lot of providers have, and Oracle is one of the first ones to actually introduce this concept. That's a physical box. It's you saying, hey, you know what? I need to go run 15, 20 of my own virtual machines on it. I don't want to pay individual compute shapes. So give me a honking server, 52, a ton of cores, not exaboxes, but a physical box dedicated just for you, but still under the whole umbrella of the same Oracle Cloud Infrastructure fundamental offerings. And then you get into the higher performance computing, HPC, GPU-based, and finally, Oracle being Oracle offers an Exadata cloud services option in different sizes. The shapes determine how many Oracle CPU counts you get, how much memory, and how much network bandwidth you're given, okay? And this is a big difference from Oracle for a lot of other providers. Is that Oracle has a different ratio of memory to CPU, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. The last piece to know about Oracle versus Azure is that we use a term called OCPU, or Oracle CPU based. Think of this as hyper-threading. Okay, so if you're seeing a server which is listed as 8 cores, you're actually going to see 8 OCPUs, which means the operating system will actually see 16 cores of logical processors to compute with. And as Jeff mentioned, there's some more details on the bottom of the slide from Oracle's perspective. So one more quick poll here. Will kind of pop up really fast here. Another 20, 30 seconds here. This poll is really, do you folks currently use a cloud provider today? And so we put the major flavors out there: OCI, AWS, Azure. Thinking about it, you're SaaS based, you're not ready yet. So kind of getting some opinions from you folks on where you're falling in lines, and we'll sort of share what our findings are. Okay, another 2 or 3 seconds here, and we'll end this poll. A couple more people were checking boxes there, so we'll give them that. Okay, so we'll end this poll and jump right in. So sharing the results here. Again, this is kind of good for you folks to get a sense of things as well. It's pretty interesting. So there's actually on the current list in this here, it's a pretty equal split between OCI and Azure for folks hosting today, which is what's surprising. We normally see this as being primarily an AWS, believe it or not, and Azure and OCI are kind of coming in second and third after that. Thinking about hosting, again, a few folks answered that question. So this is it's a pretty interesting spin on things here. All right, Jeff, you want to take over? Next slide.
Sure. So when we talk about EPM 11.2, and if you would like to know more about that, you can reference my presentation that I gave yesterday for the conference, which goes into this in a lot more detail. Some of the things that we have to count for is vertical scaling is no more. So what do I mean by that? Within the product suite, you're not able, or at least it's not supported, to stand up multiple instances of a single product anymore. So historically, if I had a very large server, I could have 4 planning JVMs running underneath that particular host, and that's not supported moving forward. So what you really start talking about is horizontal scaling. How do I scale out across more servers? And that is kind of new in the 11.1.2. I'm sorry, in the 11.2 world from the 11.1.2 world. We've got we've got Linux support both for Oracle Linux and Red Hat now. IE11 is deprecated. This is probably one of the bigger ones for a lot of folks, because when I speak with customers, they regularly talk about how they have other legacy applications that are still IE11 dependent. And what do I do if I go to 11.2? I mean, the short answer is you're going to use 2 browsers, and you can use Edge or Chrome or Firefox moving forward, but this guy's gone. And then of course now we get some more certification for newer databases like SQL Server 2016 and then Oracle DB19C now.
Thanks, Jeff. So let's take a minute and kind of talk about some of the differences, some of the OCI versus Azure Quirks as we're building out these new environments. And I'll let you jump in here first from the Microsoft side.
Sure. So when we look at Azure, one of the things that we kind of found comparing, like to like, is that I have more options when it comes to CPU clock speed on the Azure side. I'm a little bit less hemmed in, if you will. And so I get some flexibility on what I want my CPU clock to look like. I get inbound rules that are automatically set up for me when I build a new image. This is nice for people who just want to get out there and stand something up and build something and not think about what do I have to do at all these network security levels with rules and all this other stuff to be able to just get to my image. And I also get an RDP file that's automatically available for download in Azure. So I build my server, I download my RDP file, I hit go, and I'm connected. So that's kind of painless. One of the things, though, is that because if you don't bring your own license to Microsoft, they're going to build your server with the enterprise data center version, whether you like it or not. So if you build a 2 CPU image, you're still getting the full-blown license cost kind of back behind that image. That's a little pricier. We get some default DNS settings that are nice inside of here, which we'll talk about as a con over on the Oracle side here in just a second. But the servers, if you build 2 or 3 of them, all are aware of each other if you put them in the same virtual network. Not necessarily true on OCI. I get to pre-select my time zone. It doesn't just default to UTC, and I get a new box, and I'm staring at it going, why didn't my logs at 2 a.m. in the morning? And then I get this nice little feature that I like a lot in Azure, where when I build my image, I can do an auto shutdown. So if I know I'm going to be done working in my lab by 7 p.m. every evening, I just click that little box. At 7 p.m., it's going to shut my image or images down. And then I'm not getting that additional charge with my server sitting there and nobody using them.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. So on the OCI side of the house, as Jeff mentioned, there definitely are some differences here. Some things good, some things bad. We'll kind of start with what I think are some of the better things. So in the OCI world, out of the box, your boot volume, okay, it's 2 times larger than we're getting it from Microsoft from Azure, all right? So from a Windows perspective, if that's the image you're going for, you're getting 256 gigabytes of boot volume. Which is a block volume storage, boot volume disk space allocated to your server. What's nice about the boot volumes is you're not paying for that. You're paying for the compute instance, so they kind of bake that charge into the CPU count process. Another nice benefit from OCI versus Azure other providers is that they use, with the asterisk here, they use a 15:1 ratio for memory. Meaning if you have 1 OCPU, you're actually going to have 15 gigabytes of RAM, okay? If you have an 8 OCPU machine, you have 120 gigabytes of RAM. So you're getting a lot of memory without paying the added cost. Okay, so that's kind of how they work for their Intel images. And we'll discuss Intel images versus they do have a new offering for AMD images in a little bit. AMD is more flexible where you can pick and choose literally how much memory you want versus how many CPUs. But generally speaking, it's a 15:1 ratio. So you're getting a ton of memory, more than you're ever going to possibly use for Hyperion purposes. As Jeff mentioned, yes, there are some quirks and things that kind of caught us by surprise a bit over the last couple of years. The default admin account, it is created. You don't have a choice on what it's called. It's called OPC for Oracle. That account is created when you deploy the image. The password is forcibly required to be changed on first login. However, something which caught us by surprise was they also implement from the Windows perspective default password policies, which if you don't disable them, you will do what happened to myself, not too long ago when I forgot about that and my account was locked out. So you got to watch out for that one. Whereas on the Azure side, you can configure that. We do not set DNS by default, which means you have to have a DNS provider set up someplace. Think of it as more of a blank slate. You're building from the ground up. Some of those common fun things you'd expect providers to have right now, Oracle doesn't quite have all those parts and pieces, but like DNS is not set by default. You'll have to configure that to do communication easily between servers. One of the other big pieces that we found here was that default power settings for OCI images is set at balanced, not at high performance, meaning it's tuned down by default. So little gotchas you got to watch out for here. A nice to have is that your hardware is pinned. When you set it up and you attach it to an availability domain, a default domain, it's staying there, it's living there, it's not moving on you, which means you know what your CPU clock speed is going to be. We did see during some testing and comparisons that Azure seemed to float the images sometimes during restarts. Okay, so that was a little bit different for us seeing that. So generally speaking, let's kind of discuss a couple of the standard context or sort of the common cloud infrastructure design considerations, okay? And I say considerations because everything is unique. What's nice about Azure or OCI is that there's a lot of sort of collaboration occurring right now between Microsoft and Oracle. And I'm sure if you can all laugh on the phone and know about this, it's they can kind of stick it to AWS, let's face it, right? They want that market share. So from a connectivity perspective, there's 3 types of connectivity for cloud infrastructure. You have generally public internet access, you have VPN tunnels, and you have some sort of a a high band, if you will, or approach. And Azure is called Express Connect, and OCI is called Fast Connect. Think of the high band option as basically being a dedicated pipe right to data centers, as if it's you have two buildings and a line between the two of them. It's how it works. Use an intermediate party. Most companies and most organizations, when they move to cloud infrastructure, start out using public internet for some sandboxing and playing around. And then as soon as they're ready to get serious with a POC, or for small development environments, they'll go to VPN tunnels, okay, which is sort of the standard aspect. But again, three options are there for both providers. Our suggestion is, again, VPN tunnels is where we would suggest any customer at enterprise level start working, and then go to your Express Connects or Fast Connects over time as you're maturing with your cloud implementation process. Both providers also offer platform as a service database services. Okay, so you have Azure SQL Server and you have Oracle Database Cloud Services. Now, here's the funny part: when it comes to EPM on-premise, Azure SQL Server, the PaaS service, is not supported, which means if you use that, you're on your own. Will it work or won't you work? We're being recorded, so we can't say that out loud, okay? But again, use it at your own risk. On the flip side, in the Oracle side, you'd think Oracle would have ducks in a row by now, but they don't yet. There currently is no autonomous database support yet for the EPM on-premise products. That's a roadmap conversation, okay? So they both offer it. Unfortunately, from an EPM context perspective, you can't use either one of them officially. Right? What is nice about the new configurations with these two partnering companies now is that they have this interconnect process where you can actually use Azure-based services or OCI-based services interchangeably without having to set up some third-party intermediary. So that's pretty kind of a cool thing here. And you're not going to get cross-charged in terms of moving information back and forth. So, and same thing, you can also level federation like Azure AD as an example for EPM purposes. So. Some pretty cool stuff they're coming out with there.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about high availability in the cloud. So anytime you're building a new architecture, whether that's on-prem or even in the cloud, the most enterprise level builds are going to have some level of high availability. This happens in a few ways in the cloud, and it's known as either availability domains or availability zones. So when we talk about those, what we're really talking about is redundant hardware that's getting deployed in a different region or location. And this is great for things like disaster recovery and understanding that if my data center is primarily Cincinnati, Ohio, and it gets flooded or has a tornado problem, right? My backup availability zone is sitting over in Connecticut or wherever that may be. It's important to note when you're building these things out that some regions and some geographical areas have different availability zone or domain options. So some OCI regions right now only have one domain, and some Azure locations only have one or two zones. Generally, the larger ones have three, but it just kind of depends, and you got to just do your research and make sure you understand who has kind of what. One thing that is good is this concept of fault domains. So fault domains are actually concerned with, or availability sets, it's the same thing. They're concerned with the hardware within the data center itself. So for example, if you have a power go out on a server, you're not going to fail over an entire stack of software to a different zone. Instead, what happens is it's going to fail you over in the fault domain or the availability set to a different set of hardware within that individual data center. So you can spread your compute VMs that you build out across what are essentially different racks for in data center high availability. And then Azure brings another thing here to the table that's sort of nice that doesn't necessarily happen in the other offerings. And that is, within Azure, they have what are called update domains, and you can spread your servers across those so that if patching comes down from Microsoft themselves, you can leverage these to pull certain servers out of the stack at certain times so that not your entire infrastructure isn't impacted. You can also leverage these domains to your own benefit for that same level, that same sort of patching. So you can make sure you're only patching servers in one particular update domain while the other update domain servers are still servicing your end users.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So in that concept, we want to mention a couple seconds here. Oops, sorry, jumping ahead here. On the HA concept here, Oracle's done a pretty good job. They have these new things called solution playbooks, which is great for anybody who's trying to deploy an OCI infrastructure or even from a non-OCI, different cloud provider. high availability kind of construct. They sort of provide you and break out using their own terminology how you would lay things out from within a single availability domain, or in this case, an HA, which is across 2 availability domains. They go a step further and even bring into multiple region configuration. And we're not here to reinvent the wheel or re-explain Oracle's concepts to you. This stuff is under the called solution playbooks out on Oracle's website. We can get you a link. Just send me a note and I can fire that off to you where to find this direct link to these systems. But you can kind of see here, they break out the whole concept and say, hey, sure, in the real world, you keep opening the wallet up, keep paying us, and you can get all these parts and pieces that are available today, and you could deploy Hyperion in this specific case, on an HA configuration, and kind of how we would do it across which different platform, which different services are required.
So another concept that we have that the cloud brings us that on-prem doesn't necessarily stand itself up well to is this idea of active versus standby capacity design. So if you look on the left here, you'll see that I have a couple nodes or servers for simplicity's sake that are out here running various components in the EPM suite. And what I can actually do is I could build more nodes out than this as part of my initial deployment. So maybe I'd build out 4 servers this activity, and I'm going to take 2 of them at the end of the day, and I'm going to shut nodes 3 and 4 off entirely, and then I can put rules in place that do some things for me. So for example, say coming into a close period, I know I'm going to have more users in the system for that 1 week maybe of every month, or a couple weeks of a planning cycle. I'm going to write a rule that says I've got these 2 nodes out here that are servicing my users 90% of the time, but for these specific time windows or for this specific utilization, if it hits a certain threshold or a time, I can fire up nodes 3 and 4, and then once the close process is over, I can then work to shut those back down. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is this is really awesome for flipping the switch on. But with any kind of transactional system like HFM or Essbase, I do have to make sure before I flip the off that my users aren't actively using those nodes anymore. So it would be kind of an outage situation where EPM is concerned, where my close is over, I'm going to have an outage that allows me to bring nodes 4 and 3 back down. I come back up with nodes 1 and 2, and I'm rocking and rolling again. But you don't want to have an automated rule that just comes through and says, oh, I've dropped below 75%, I'll shut off node 4, because I really don't have any way of knowing if there's a consolidation or an aggregation or something running out there that could be very impactful to the underlying data. So while it's pretty sweet for an up, you do have to be a little bit careful on the shutdown process.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And actually, and if I could add 2 points to this, you're spot on here. And this is we're talking about how to conceptually use some of this new infrastructure technology being offered by these cloud providers today. You may find it, a lot of these companies have their own version of what are called custom images or streamlined images, and it's sort of the ad hoc deploy on you go, more of a DevOps, where you're spinning up as workloads require it and taking away as workloads don't require it. That's a great concept. It's something which we're working with Oracle trying to discuss how to leverage that for EPM on-premise purposes as well, to be creative. But this is something that Jeff and I kind of came up with as a model which seems to work well for some customers. So again, more information about this, let us know. We'll be happy to answer questions if you have on that. Taking a moment to discussing another big benefit of working with either cloud provider or any cloud provider, a DR in the cloud, okay, whether it be just a backup concept off-premise or true disaster recovery. This is how we've seen historically most customers begin their journey to cloud infrastructure. It's saying, you know what, it's a pretty low-risk way to me to test things out and get things set up off my current on-premise data center, and I can kind of play around and see how it works, test the waters, if you will. So DR in the cloud operates in a very similar fashion as if you had your own on-premise data centers in different geographic regions, okay? Ideally, if you're building and hosting your production environments in a cloud provider already, whether you want to use the same cloud provider or not, and keep in mind, with Azure and OCI in particular, you could even choose to separate vendors if you want to and go true hybrid, okay? But generally speaking, it's used for things like you're doing copying your backups. You're going to do things like replicating your block object volume storage devices. So in other words, we're trying to remove the application piece of Hyperion from the mix and focus on using the cloud technology that's out there for you. So block volume replication, it's a very, very real world thing. And that's sort of how the best way you would do that as far as, replicating your systems from production to DR, if you will, again, cross regions. You're going to want to leverage cloud DNS. Now, this is new. A lot of customers, or my experience anyway, will move compute and they'll move storage and they'll move applications and move databases to cloud, but they want to own DNS management themselves on premise, or possibly even things like Active Directory or your LDAP providers on premise. Totally fine. That works well for all these providers, assuming you have the right bandwidth established for it. But an ideal situation when you want to do DR in a cloud provider, you want to leverage their cloud DNS so you can use their traffic manager or Azure's DNS management service, if you will, to basically handle that steering of traffic between the different zones, production or DR. Okay. From a database perspective, DR in the cloud is very easy. From an Oracle perspective, you have tools like DataGuard and Golden Gate at your disposal, right, for these types of purposes. You architect the same way you architect currently on-premise. So the same limitations as well as same features are available for you. And when it comes to SQL Server, of course, you have different models there as well, log shipping or always-on clustering. But the bottom line is DR in the cloud is a very nice way to start your process and journey to cloud infrastructure for Hyperion in particular. So we have two more quick poll questions, and this is where it gets kind of fun from our conversation. Now we're talking about truly comparing, things like performance, cost, and whatnot. So let's start with a really fast poll here, and I want to get most folks to answer if we can here. This is who do you think is going to win the actual performance battle, Azure or OCI, in relation to Hyperion EPM? People like this question, Jeff. A lot of answers coming in fast on this one.
Yeah, everybody's got their theory.
That's right. All right, we'll give it 2 or 3 more seconds here. All right, so we end this poll and let's share the results. So surprisingly, a lot of you folks think OCI is going to win the performance battle, which means you believe that OCI for the on-premise Hyperion software stack is going to perform a lot better on OCI. A handful of you folks think that no, it's going to be Google or Amazon. So let's sort of jump in here to the next slide.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the real world results we're about to kind of look at. So the challenge, has already been stated. We're going to compare as close as we can VMs that were built in both Azure and OCI. And the images we ultimately went with are listed here. So we've got the standard D5 V2, 16 CPU, 2.6 clock, 56 gig of RAM box versus the 2.8 CPU, 2 gigahertz box on the OCI side. And this was one of the constraints that we'll talk a little bit more about here as we move forward. But sizing the actual clock speed was a little tricky because OCI sort of, if you stay on the Intel side of the house, shoehorns you into this one shape fits all kind of box, and Azure gives you a lot more flexibility on the clock, but we got as close as we could.
Yep. All right, so here are the results and the winners.
So as you can see, looking at this, certain aspects were quicker, about 50-50 across the board. So where things such as CPU clock speed came into play most significantly, you pretty much see Azure kind of pulling away a little bit. But the thing OCI certainly had going for it was faster out of the box disk speeds, actually sometimes significantly faster. So it becomes, at least in this comparison, a little bit of a which one's more important to you for the way you process data and information.
Absolutely. And one thing I do want to point out here is, as Jeff mentioned in the previous slide, this is based upon using what we call the VM standards or the Intel standard images. We did actually do a series of tests, didn't put it in the slide as an update just yet, using Oracle's new AMD shapes. They call them the E3 Flex shapes. And we'll discuss that more in a couple minutes here. But what I want to point out is that the E3 shapes do offer a little more flexibility. Clock speed is still fixed, but they're faster clock speeds right now. Okay, so we did see these discrepancies sort of shrink a little bit in between the two different components. So just something to kind of keep in mind there. All right, so Surprisingly, right? So the kind of the general rule of thumb is this: if looking at this last slide here, you see that Azure seems to get the up and up when it comes to things like, as Jeff mentioned, CPU is sort of the higher number of categories, if you will, consolidation, aggregations, and whatnot. We kind of compared back and forth to are pretty close. When there were differences, there are pretty dramatic differences. But now let's get into cost for a minute here. Okay, so talking about what does cloud actually cost? And this is our last poll question. I want to pop this on here as well. And this is more sort of an FYI for you folks. Who do you think is going to win the cost battle? Which is more affordable? Do you think OCI or Azure or somebody else? And then we'll kind of talk through and give you, we're going to dig more into what we provided for testing already and sort of show you some examples of configurations built on both these environments and how you'd cost these out. All right, and I'll give another 4 or 5 seconds. All right, and we'll end the poll and we'll share the results. So interesting here, it's almost 50-50, equal OCI versus Azure, which means I guess the jury's out, if you will. And a couple of folks do think that Google or Amazon's gonna be more affordable, okay? So let's talk about cost a bit here. So how do you know, can you even afford cloud, right? Well, right off the bat, the way we start for any customer is this. We always start with the cost calculators. And this gives you a good, we kind of call pay-as-you-go model, if you will. And pay-as-you-go means if I was going to sign up and give a credit card, to Oracle or to Microsoft, right? What am I being charged for my rack retail price? This is the best way to begin your journey to the cloud as far as a costing aspect is concerned. So Oracle provides 2 different great calculators. They actually have one which you can break down individual components, parts and pieces, but they also have ones out here which you can actually do more, generally speaking, workloads, okay? I have a big database workload. What am I looking at as far as dollars and cents? And comparatively, Microsoft has their own version of the pricing calculator. So these are very easy to use. What we found though, as we try to go through navigate these things, is they're updated constantly. So if you go price something out today, the cost may not change. A month from now, when you go to maybe submit a proposal or a budget, possibly you do your discovery and then your proposals, but they may have added more options or changed some verbiage around. So that's been one of the frustrations we've had working with all these providers. In particular with Oracle, I'll say it, they like to change names, as we all know, and acronyms. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind, but the calculators are actually out there, right? So the next piece we want to do is we want to actually step into a couple configurations for you folks, and you'll start seeing who actually won the cost battle. We put 4 configurations in this slide deck, which you all have after the presentation, but we're only going to talk about 2 of them today. We did a micro environment. We did a small, a mid-size, and a large environment. And these environments are built on true customers that we have deployed as far as sizing architectures, okay? So let's start with a small environment first. Knowing this is no discounts, this is no calling my sales rep up on September 27th, right before the quarter end for Oracle, right? Begging and borrowing, stealing. This is if you're starting with the rack rates, okay? What are you looking at here? These include the compute instances, the storage, as well as your operating system licenses. There's no database servers involved, okay? These numbers are based upon full-time uptime, which means 24 hours a day for a full month average cost, right? So if we start with a small environment for Hyperion, it could be applying Essbase or it could be HFM, right? It'd be a couple servers you're looking at, we'll say eight OCPU cores, okay, which is 16 logical cores to leverage. We'll allocate a terabyte of block volume storage, and of course a load balancer as well for front end. Here are the numbers you're looking at a monthly cost, okay, an annual cost. You can see the price difference is pretty dramatic here, right? Azure is more than 2 times what OCI is as far as cost. So this goes back to questioning performance versus cost. Where's that fine balance you have to find? And the big piece to point out here is if you start with the top item, the compute items, yes, you get a little faster clock speed out of your Azure systems, but look at the cost difference. You're being stuck without BYOL, you're being stuck with data center license costs. Whereas in Oracle, you could do a standard version if you want to. If you bring your own license from Microsoft, then of course you can take those out of the mix altogether. The big hit, however, it's networking. What Oracle does is they give the first 10 terabytes of called egress traffic each month for free to customers. Okay, no one else does that. Anything incoming you get charged for, anything outgoing from Oracle, first 10 terabytes a month is free. Every other provider, Azure, as well as other providers, they'll charge you as metered, okay? So we had to compare apples to apples, which means we had to compare what would a 10 terabytes of egress traffic be costing me per month, right? And that's the big difference you get here for a small environment. Taken to a large environment, this would be for a high availability design system, which could maybe include the HFM stack, DRM stack, as planning Essbase, the whole 9 yards. Okay, here's looking at everything redundant now, which means 2 load balancers, doubling your block volume storage, as well as, technically speaking, 16 machines. You can see the annual cost, right? It's right around double, if you will, end of the day, when it's soup comes to nuts here, to run Azure versus OCI. So the bottom line is, by this comparison, you can see these environments, okay, whether it be small, medium, large, micro, whatever, there's a big cost advantage to considering OCI versus Azure or one of the providers. Again, no discounts included at this point, but just to kind of get this, listed out, and you kind of see how it's built here, and kind of how we're costing things differently. Okay. In the presentation deck, we actually do throw out here a couple more samples, mid-size as well as micro. Take a look at these afterward, and any questions, we're more than happy to talk about these things for you folks. So Jeff, do you want to jump over and kind of give a
in summary, I think it's important to just kind of understand that both of these, and really, any of the providers are fairly similar, and they all bring certain strengths to the table. With flexibility in the compute shapes, you've got good options now with both Azure and OCI. At the time we had started this, the AMD options weren't fully baked yet, but now they're available, so that gives you even more flexibility, which kind of puts them on the same level there. CPU performance choices are generally still higher in Azure. You're going to be able to kind of tweak and select what you want over there more than you are going to be able to on our good friends in OCI. You get better database offerings on Azure as well. I personally feel that the ease of deployment there for the actual, I just want to stand up a couple VMs, is a little bit easier. The Windows config is obviously right out of the box about the way you'd like it to be, but then again, if you're going with Windows operating system, that's really not surprising. They're the vendor. And then the console administration down there, I also feel is pretty comparable. I actually like the OCI look and feel a little bit better than I do the Azure one, because I feel like the Azure one is very much designed for architects. And if you know exactly what you're looking for and all the pieces and parts, you'll be fine. But if you're not used to seeing 65 options laid out for you all at once, it can be a little daunting.
Yeah, and that's a great summation too, and kind of comparing, as you mentioned, with OCI, it does come down to really what you're looking for. I think in the console, I'll absolutely agree. I think the fact that Oracle was late to the cloud infrastructure game gave them an advantage. One, let's face it, they went out and they poached a lot of talent from all these providers, okay, get the best of the best, bring them on board. But two, they found out what didn't work and what did work. And they tried to take that and try to bring that in, and sort of integrate that into their actual design of the actual applications interfaces. So as Jeff mentioned, the console administration, you literally with a sign up online for a free trial could literally be up with a compute instance within a few hours. As a joke, I had my high school son actually go and build a Minecraft server up on OCI with a free trial, and he did it in 2 days. Okay, never seeing cloud infra in his life. So it's not hard to work with these things. But at the end of the day, I think the overall decision needs to be made. It's your cost versus performance. Storage, generally speaking, it's a lot better, a lot more cost effective, and a lot better performing in Oracle. Compute, I'd say, would be Azure hands down. Okay, so before we get into the kind of the rest of the time for Q&A here, I want to mention a couple of things for you folks in the call. We do run environments in all cloud providers here in our own labs. Okay, so if at any point in time somebody wants to see EPM on Azure or OCI and kind of see how it performs, we have the same sample apps deployed to both of them. We're happy to let us know, contact us. We can get you guys a little fast temporary account. You can jump on and you can have at it and do your own playing if you'd like to out there. Okay. That's the first thing. And same thing too, if you're brand new to these cloud providers and you want to see things like, hey, how does the OCI console look or Azure console look? Let us know. We'll be more than happy to share, our experiences with you folks, as well as you can kind of get and play on yourselves. When it comes to resources, something I want to do a little fast shout out here from is that there's a guy named Bob Evans. You may have heard of his name before in the past or not. He runs a great website, a great blog called Cloud Wars. And I want to put this in here. I got permission to do this because this is a really, I'm sure there's money involved here and there, but he has a pretty non-biased opinion of the providers, and he keeps a nice tab month to month of who's doing what. So it's a great, easy way you can get more information about trending in cloud infrastructure, even outside of Hyperion. Okay, it's a couple points to kind of call out there. And finally, before we get to the questions, one more reminder, anybody in the session today, go subscribe to our website for our newsletter and information. And again, the Apple or Amazon gift card, your call, is up for grabs. We're gonna try to do this drawing before tomorrow if we can. So we might give tomorrow afternoon, just kind of more time for folks to get the slide deck and whatnot. But then we'll notify you for a chance to win. So, and on that note, are there any questions? You can feel free to actually pop it right into the Q&A section if you want to there.
So one of the questions that I'll revisit is, can you recommend a fast HFM prod app server specification in OCI? Everything used to be faster when we ran it on our own data center. So I think this comes back to the concept of the clock speeds we were talking about when we originally ran these tests, right? We were pretty much baked into the Skylake series that they gave us. Those are like 2 gigahertz clock speeds. I think they've now come up with the Skylakes that are up to like 2.3 gigahertz clock speeds. But at the end of the day, yeah, there's some narrowness there. And probably your best bet to get a little bit faster would be to investigate the AMD series. Now, the bad news about that is if you've already got your servers all built, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe, I don't think you can just swap those image sizes.
Correct. Yeah, we've actually done some work with Oracle even on this, where we want to get some true comparisons. But it's true, and the way to think about it is this: if you were going old school, installing a Microsoft Windows operating system on a physical Intel server, you couldn't take and clone that thing without a lot of headaches and rework. Clone it onto AMD hardware very easily. And that's sort of the mentality that they've provided. Intel images are flexible to and from, up and down, reshaping them images. AMDs are flexible in their own vertical, but you can't cross-pollinate. So that was a bummer when we came across that. As far as a thing. But yes, the new E3 Flex shapes do give faster processors. And I discussed with Oracle actually and the OCI engineers there, give us the use case scenario. Why would somebody use Intel over the AMDs? And they said ultimately it comes down to the software stack, and Hyperion could care less now, which is nice. He used to care, and secondly is preference. So they encouraged us to consider the E3s. Now, one piece I didn't mention about E3s, Jeff, and I'm not sure if you mentioned this or not yet. The cost savings to go from the Intel processors, you saw how the cost discrepancies between OCI and Azure already were pretty substantial difference in savings. It's a 30 to 40% further reduction in cost to go to the AMD processors over the Intels, which makes it really hard not to consider looking at and saying, is my consolidation taking 27 minutes? Can I live with 32 minutes, right? If I can save, that much per year. So it's something definitely to consider.
Yep, and then just one more that popped out here that got answered, but I'll revisit is, can you share your experiment in detail? So if anybody would like to kind of know how we came across the data or would like to see it in action, absolutely, we're happy to share that information. We didn't want to bog down the presentation with you guys staring at a whole bunch of spreadsheets of like consolidation times and aggregations, because, well, that's pretty boring for us to talk about and for you to listen to. But if you want more information around that, we can do that. We still have these environments up and running, and we can certainly even do some live fire demos. So whatever works for you, just reach out to us. That's why we've got our contact information out here, so we can help you guys get to where you need to be for your various environments.
Yep. I do want to read off, there was one more great question early on. Somebody asked about Oracle Database 19c, because I did mention that the fact that we currently don't support autonomous databases today. And the question was, isn't that autonomous database? Well, technically speaking, 19c has autonomous management features. It's not a true autonomous database component from Oracle at this point. Okay, so autonomous database is referred to as called ATP, which is the transaction processing database, as well as their autonomous data warehouse database, ADW. So those are the two which are per Oracle autonomous today. Okay, and we didn't talk about 20C and 21C, which are up and coming databases, but that's more of an EPM conversation, as Jeff mentioned. He discussed those in a little more detail in his last presentation. So I wanted to kind of bring that up there and just sort of pop it out to the folks who are asking there. Are there any more questions? Okay. Well, again, we want to thank you again for your time this afternoon, and hopefully this information was helpful or insightful, or at least maybe sort of planting a couple seeds in your minds here. We do work on all the platforms, and as Jeff mentioned, we're more than happy to share our real experiences with you folks. So please feel free to reach out. And thanks, Jeff, for cohort with me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everybody for attending.
Yep.